And joining us live in studio is Professor Jasper Knight, a geoscientist at Wits University. Puseletso Mofokeng is a senior forecaster with the South African Weather Service. And joining us on OB, or Outside Broadcast, is James Brent Steyn. He's the spokesperson for the Minister of Local Government, Environmental Affairs and Development Planning. Good evening to you, gentlemen, and thanks so much for joining us. You at home, you're welcome to join in on 011-5422-186 or on Twitter at ANN7TV. We'll start with you. Just looking at what the government is doing, Mr. Steyn, particularly when it comes to assisting the devastated communities.
Hi, thanks for having us. We're doing everything we can. We're putting people into shelters. We are providing them with humanitarian aid. We spent the whole night last night arranging with different aid groups to ensure that services can be provided to affected communities, displaced people, and we to date haven't heard of people who have not been assisted where there was a need identified.
Would you say that this is a humanitarian crisis, or as you mentioned that adequate supplies and support has been given?
It is a humanitarian crisis, and it's the result. It's the end of a massive disaster that hit us on Tuesday night. So from here going forward over the next few weeks, we're probably going to sit with quite a challenge. We've got thousands of people that have lost their homes. In the Eden district, we've had to evacuate 8,000 people, 2,000 of those from informal settlements and the rest from built-up areas in the town. We've had massive property damage. People have lost everything. So it's going to be a massive challenge to make sure that these people's lives can return to normal, and we will do what we can to ensure that that does happen.
And just from a government policy, when it comes to an emergency of this magnitude, you obviously would rely on other departments to intervene, use discretionary emergency funds to ensure that the cleanup operation is less traumatic for residents. So what is the process going forward?
Well, at this stage, we're still fighting a very big fire. We're dealing with 8,000 displaced people in the Eden district. We will assess the situation once the storm has completely subsided and we've managed to address the immediate concerns. Once that has been done, we'll start looking at the other protocols and matters that we need to look at going forward.
All right, Mr. Steyn, please stay on the line with us. We have Professor Jasper Knight, geoscientist at Wits University, and Puseletso Mofokeng, senior forecaster with the South African Weather Service. Professor Knight, just early warning or early detections that can be employed. Are we adequately equipped or capacitated as a country to be able to assist or mitigate the damage?
Well, I think as we've seen over the past couple of days, we've got several emergency situations ongoing. And really this sort of illustrates the problem that we're having, because many of these disastrous situations and emergency situations require knowledge and understanding of a wide variety of different things. So often it's actually quite difficult to prioritize where the next big events may be coming from. And it's very difficult, of course, in a situation whereby no one has enough money in order to prioritize where our monitoring systems need to be deployed.
Yeah, and Mr. Mofokeng, I mean, you issue weather warnings to say people must stay at home, etc. But how well coordinated are your efforts in working with disaster management, risk management in provinces to ensure that the entire process is followed through?
Well, our relationship with the disaster management is working very well, without doubt. You would remember in the case of the NEWO, there was a joint operation center which was set up to help the people in the low veld of Mpumalanga and Limpopo. You would remember that the disaster management formed the joint operation center on Tuesday night in preparation for the storm. In fact, we actually had picked up that the system is going to be very much intense in the early of last week. And then towards the middle of last week, we actually monitored that the system is actually consistent, showing that this event is most probable. Hence, we issued even the media release on a Friday to make sure that the public of South Africa actually are aware of what is to happen. Beyond that, the relationship behind the the closed doors had been quite well. The Joint Operations Center had been because of the information that we supplied to them. Hence, they even advised to a point that even the schools were closed the day before, which was obviously to minimize the impact.
Yeah. Mr. Steyn, do you think the province did all it could to warn residents and try to prevent any further loss of property and lives? Is there something that you could have done differently or more?
We'll have to assess that probably in the aftermath of this disaster. My opinion at this stage is that there was nothing further we could have done. We took unprecedented steps, including having all the schools closed on Wednesday, following on some information provided by our colleagues from the SA Weather Service and other experts who analysed those reports and said that this was going to be the worst storm in 30 years, with ocean swells of 12 to 13 meters, gale force winds, torrential rainfall, and just terrible conditions across the province. So we closed the schools. Turned out to be an excellent proactive measure, considering that we had more than, I think the figure is about 69 to 80 schools have damaged, some of them quite seriously. So we did what we could. We reacted as fast as we could on the incidents identified, and I want to commend the emergency services for a job well done.
And joining us on the line is Ridwan Omar from the Gift of the Givers. Mr. Omar, good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. Just the readiness of South Africans, at various departments and stakeholders in dealing with calamities. We know Gift of the Givers were the first to react in assisting those that have been displaced.
Good evening to you, and good evening to your panel.
So I'm saying, in terms of Gift of the Givers, do we have enough organizations of your magnitude or size to deal with the humanitarian situation in the Western Cape?
I think we do.
And your role this time around, what kind of assistance were you giving?
Currently, we've been assisting on the ground to try and ascertain what is the need for the members of the public who've been displaced and houses have been burned down. And obviously we've been trying to provide aid in terms of shelter, where tents, housing, daily sanitary requirements, as well as food and clothing, blankets, and all of those type of things. And obviously we've been liaising with the municipality and working hand in hand with the municipality to ascertain how big the problem is and taking it a day at a time.
Yeah, and in these community halls and various assembly areas, what is the state of mind and are people getting counseling? What are their conditions where they are at the moment?
Fortunately, I think it's in the aftermath. Basically, we've gotten to realize that we sympathize with those families who have lost their homes. But fortunately enough, the areas that have been burnt and been gone through destruction, there were quite a few homes that people were able to return to. And unfortunately, the ones that are still at the camps as such, we're trying to do the best in order to basically make them comfortable as possible. And obviously, at this point in time, the municipality is doing bulk of the work. And I take my hat off to them for the efforts that they've been putting in. And obviously, we try to consolidate to get all of the people who have been displaced at one venue. So it makes it easy for us to coordinate certain activities as far as meals and transport and all issues are concerned. So hopefully by tomorrow we should have some finality in terms of how far we're going with that.
Yeah. Mr. Steyn, the sense we're getting is that it's a very well-oiled machinery that utilized the information from the Weather Service and then you cascaded that information to residents to also safeguard their own livelihoods. What more can be done in terms of just from community members, those that want to reach out?
I guess when it comes to natural disasters, basically, there's certain conditions that are not in our hand. The weather services can only give us so much information. Over and above that, what transpires and the surprise events that take place, like what happened in Knysna with the fires, simply catches people off guard. Obviously, it's for every town to be able to say that we've got sufficient contingency plans in place in order to say this is how we can deal with situations of this nature. And every different situation, I think, is a learning curve and a learning lesson for us as communities. To be able to say, listen here, we need to put in some more resources into stuff of this nature. Because obviously, weather patterns around the world, and especially in South Africa as well, has been changing on a drastic level.
Yeah.
And we need to be just a bit more aware of that and see how we can be more prepared, hopefully.
All right, please stay on the line, Mr. Omar. And Professor Knight, I mean, these are various elements that we're dealing with. It's almost a surreal environment, a situation where on the one side there are raging fires, on the other side is the natural disasters and floods, etc. So in again assessing where the risk is for the country, we are lucky that we're not as bad as other nations, and I suppose if you inland, you're a little bit more safer. What can we anticipate going forward in terms of the climate change and weather patterns going forward?
Yes, well, climate change is really one of the most important issues for not only reacting to these types of events and predicting when they may take place in the future, but moreover, it provides the basis for sustainable development and economic growth of the entire country for decades to come. And it's really in that context that we need to approach how we manage and predict these events. Because, of course, if we don't manage our water properly, whether that is floods on the one hand or droughts on the other, then, of course, that has big negative impacts on economic development, food production, health, and social and economic aspects right across the board. So really we need to develop a more nuanced and integrated understanding of how climate change in the future, both temperature and rainfall, might impact upon the land surface and people. And that's really where the role of government needs to play an important part. So we've already heard this evening about how government is trying to manage and take control of this situation in terms of emergency planning. But really, in order to do that effectively, government needs to integrate different government departments, different agencies and stakeholders. And this shouldn't just be a one-off event. It shouldn't just be something that is switched on when an emergency situation takes place. We need to have a more continuous dialogue in order to better understand how, when these events take place, we can suddenly switch the switch and all of these departments work together in an integrated way. That's really what is needed now.
All right, let's just get a response. Mr. Steyn, in terms of the assurance that the system is indeed well plugged in and ready to kick in case of an emergency, are we at that level yet?
I think we've shown that there's always room for improvement in some areas, but I don't think that. I think you would have to try very hard to fault us on the actions we've taken when we took them, and the various disaster-related entities within the Western Cape dealing with a never-before-seen event that dealt us a number of hard blows, including the fires ongoing in the Eden area. So we always learn from experience, and we will certainly learn from this one. But from my personal opinion, we've done the best we could.
We certainly appreciate the efforts. Thanks so much. That's Mr. James Steyn, a spokesperson for the Minister of Local Government, Environmental Affairs and Development Planning, joining us via outside broadcast. Now, we continue in studio, though. In terms of this being unprecedented, the first in 30 years, the information that you extracted from the Weather Service, how far back does that data go in terms of giving you the warnings and also the ability to prepare adequately?
Well, normally we would actually confine ourselves within 2 days. That is where the government of South Africa emphasized that we have to give the public the forecast. So the day 1 and day 2 are most critical. But in terms of the range at which the South African Weather Service can actually issue a forecast, it could actually, we actually predict 7 days ahead of time. There is also a 14-day, that is just behind the scene. That's when we're monitoring the system, we're monitoring the confidence of the models. And once we pick consistency, that's when now, within the 7-day range, that's when if there's anything critical, we can actually issue it just like we did in the past. That is on Friday, even throughout the weekend. We've been making preparations to make sure that as little of the impact is actually evidence there, which is indeed what we have done. So far, I think we have done exceptionally well in terms of the forecast. It's been accurate. Even in the next systems, we are to actually make sure that every disaster management in every province is actually working together with us, but we don't leave the public behind. We do actually we do actually educate the public to understand that they need to do what, under what conditions. For example, how to prevent yourself from being hit by the lightning, how to necessarily make sure that you build the houses that are strong enough to sustain, or rather to withstand those kind of conditions that we saw in Cape Town. Those are the conditions. Those are the education.
And I mean, being a natural disaster, really, it's difficult to, I suppose, plan as communities, because on the one side you could say take shelter in your home, and then it's struck by lightning, and that causes a fire and damage. So, you know, again, how do we empower communities, especially those that are under-resourced?
Just like the professor has pointed out, it is important. Some of the things really need funding. In the normal system, if we're in the perfect world, we would actually make a point that everyone is having a strong house. But unfortunately, because of the conditions we cannot prevent, it is difficult to help everyone. However, the best we can, we do. So in terms of, you know, sometimes people build, even when in Cape Town, we know that the main thing there is wind. So we cannot at the same time say people must not build. They have to build. However, it is important that as the conditions have been this strong, they can actually start obviously considering planning around the weather itself.
But Mr. Omar, now let's talk about the most vulnerable that are living in shanty towns and may not have access to humanitarian aid. How many of these communities are affected, or how many are you assisting?
Currently, fortunately, in this incident in Niza, there was only one area, Concordia and White location, that was affected with the fires. So it wasn't, it was more the localities within the town, CBD itself, and in certain areas and surrounds that were affected by the fire on a great level. But like you said, in terms of accessibility, obviously, this is a time where we as human beings realize our nature and in the manner in which we've been created, that basically there's some kind of speciality that comes out of us when we face with disaster. The aspect of giving. And fortunately, you find in South Africa as well, people have opened their hearts, whether it be corporates, individuals, families, that open their hearts when it comes to disaster. The unfortunate thing that it has to take such a disastrous incident for us to open our heart, and hopefully we can live on a daily basis more effectively in that way and give to our community back.
Yeah.
And hopefully uplift communities in this manner.
I mean, for me, the overarching thread is that we need to have better planning. In other words, to ensure that the infrastructure, when it comes to housing, can withstand the weather conditions, especially in areas that are volatile, like the Western Cape. That even when a disaster strikes, there isn't further damage because of the collapse of the infrastructure.
Obviously so. I mean, every community, I think, is striving to better the environment in which the communities are living in, which is basically trying to be safeguarded from the natural elements. But obviously, like you said, you know, there's a disparity of rich and poorer communities, and obviously those are the hurdles that we have to overcome, depending on what are the aspects within the South African context, which has placed us in this disparity. So if we can overcome that, then hopefully we can move to the next step. But it's something that has to be worked on an ongoing basis, and hopefully we have the makeup to be able to reach that stage.
All right, Ridwan, thanks so much. Ridwan Omar is with the Gift of the Givers, saying the humanitarian crisis, they're still appealing for assistance, but generally it is under control. And Professor Knight, you were talking about the importance of prioritizing and, of course, integrating a community or other communication processes within various government departments. Do you think this puts it under the scanner that, in fact, there isn't that collaboration that is required?
I don't actually think that's the case. I agree with the comment that was made earlier on, in as much as many of the actions that we've seen so far have actually been pretty good and pretty coordinated. Now, obviously, we are still in the middle of all of these events, so how they're going to pan out over the next few days, we don't really know. But really, what has been demonstrated so far is that the remit of the National Disaster Management Centre in trying to integrate responses from different government departments when such events take place is actually playing out pretty effectively. Now, clearly, after the event, then we can have a better understanding of the relationship between those things and identify things that we could do better. And of course, that's a very important way forward. But I think it's pretty good so far.
Yeah. Okay. And Mr. Mfokeng, just going forward in terms of how much longer these weather conditions will persist?
Well, I think what is left currently is that along the Western Cape coast, that is from the southwest coast, south coast, including the Eastern Cape coast, we still have strong winds, we still have very rough seas. So that is still persisting. I think by tomorrow they are going to start moderating, but they are still going to be still somewhat dangerous. Going to the weekend, I think everything will go back to normality. And in the next 7 days or so, it will be generally quiet across the country. Yes, there would be a few thunder showers on Saturday. However, it won't be anything as extreme as what we have seen currently.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thanks indeed for your time. Much appreciated. That's Professor Jasper Knight. He's a geoscientist at Wits University, and Puseletso Mofokeng, a senior forecaster with the South African Weather Service. We take a quick ad break. We'll see you shortly.